Alright folks, a major PlayStation Portal firmware update just went out, and we now have full access to nearly all PS5 game streaming. That's available via the PS Plus game catalog and any games that you digitally own. So during a new update, you'll be prompted with this new screen saying play games via cloud streaming. We can just hit next from there, but there is going to be a new intro sequence. So you still have the Portal icon, but now we have this little prompt up here where we can connect via remote play, that's a remote PS5, or enter cloud streaming, or we can just make a search. Now I do want to point out there's two main ways to navigate that top row. You can use the D-pad to thumb between them. You still have to hit X to actually go into that category, but when you do that, you're automatically set up to prompt into whatever it is that particular tab has ready to show you. So for example, I'm already ready to see search. I'm ready to start surfing through these content items, or you can hit L1 and R1 and that will immediately get you into the content and display it right then and there. But the new menu option is this cloud streaming with PlayStation Plus Premium, which it should go without saying, you still need Premium to stream on the PlayStation Portal. This was relatively new last year when Sony allowed the option to stream via the PlayStation Plus game catalog. That could be PS Plus Extra or Premium titles. They were only PS5 streaming titles, and that is still the case here, but now there is a newly redesigned menu. The top row here shows content that I've recently either launched or I might have recently redeemed these or purchased from the PlayStation Store. Pretty much anytime you do those interactions, they will show up in this top row here. Then on the bottom, we can see the new distinction, which is we can still stream from that game catalog, or now we can look at and stream games that we digitally own, whether it is or is not in the game catalog. So first, just to quickly recap the streaming option for PS Plus Premium and also clarify even more so the distinction, and that this is still primarily PlayStation 5 streaming off Sony's new PS5 server blades they launched 2 years ago. So that's why for the premium option, well, premium and extra for the game catalog, this is not necessarily a ton of titles, but it's technically full, or at least I'm fairly certain this is everything that should be available to you because it's all native PS5 versions. So that's the thing. There's still no PS4 streaming, no PS3 streaming. Those are two different servers. Those are two different server blades that Sony operates. It's only still PlayStation 5 games. So if it has a PS5 version, if it's in the game catalog, it's probably going to show up here. And that's why you do see some, well, a lot of the classic titles, those all have native PS5 versions. There is more recent stuff on here, like for example, in October, the PS Plus Extra lineup had Until Dawn, Silent Hill 2. Those are there, so I'm fairly certain that anything that is PS5 should be on here for the game catalog. But now we can go over to streaming games in your library. Now, the ironic thing is that for me, I don't really have a lot of digital PS5 games. You all know I primarily play physical and I buy physical all the time, so this page is going to look very different for a lot of you, depending on if you primarily buy digital or not. But it still stands that if you either redeem a lot of PS Plus games or you buy them outright, usually if it has a PS5 version, we've seen that on the back end, Sony's really been adding a lot of these games to their streaming option. And so the PlayStation blog does say, and they show a list here, of around 2,800 PS5 native games that can be streamed, which seems like a vast majority of them at this point. So it would seem as though anything that does come out nowadays or anything that's in the back catalog, if it came out on PlayStation 5, there's a very good chance you can now stream it directly on the portal. You don't have to remote play to your PlayStation 5. And the performance here is still pretty much as you would expect, as we saw from the last time that we looked into this for PS Portal. The streaming is pretty reliable. It looks very clean. There's still a bit of a latency hiccup that I can feel, but you know that really is highly dependent on the person. Some people are a lot more sensitive to it. I certainly am, but you might have a better experience doing it that way versus remote play, which still is best played within your home network from your personal PS5, and that might require, or really the best situation is hardwiring your PlayStation 5, playing within the same room as the router. You know, the experience varies widely with the Portal. That's why some love it and swear by it, and others not so much. But this does add a lot of utility to the Portal, and that now that's not really going to be an issue if you can stream off Sony servers and you have a much better option to play the games that way. And it also gives you that option too, that agency of leaving your home console perhaps completely turned off. For a lot of folks, they don't really like rest mode on the console. Maybe they prefer keeping the console entirely off. And so this really unlocks a whole new era of what you can do with your Portal, because you can digitally own and stream the games that way. Now, one interesting thing Sony says you can now do is buy things from the PlayStation Store, which is going to be exclusively tied to things like MTX, season passes, cosmetics. Usually it's something where the game has that sort of baked-in PlayStation Store feature to where you can buy it without really sort of leaving your game session. And so situations like that, you should be able to transact directly on the PlayStation Portal. I'm launching Final Fantasy VII Rebirth right now because while I do own this game on disc, you can see this is the premium trial. So I do have the option, in sort of a fringe case here, of buying this game directly on the Portal. So if I go to the standard edition and hit this, standard, $69.99, it will allow me to transact right here, and I would assume continue to play and stream the game right from here. So that is one of those, I suspect, a fringe example of being able to buy a full game on the PlayStation Portal. Ideally, you don't necessarily need the Portal either, though, because at that point you could just use the PlayStation mobile app. But it's an interesting example of how you can transact on the Portal for MTX and also full games if a trial does have that option baked in. Now, the search option is pretty self-explanatory. You can search anything that can be streamed, or if you're trying to find out if you can stream it. The thing that doesn't show up is any game that is not available to buy. So something like Wolverine, it has a PlayStation Store listing. Even though you can wishlist it on the PS Store, it won't show up here. Other games will show up, but it will prompt you to buy those games. It'll show a QR code. It'll prompt you to go to the PlayStation Store, buy it and download it. Well, at least buy it via the PlayStation mobile app. And as long as you digitally own it, then it would server-side show up on the Portal, and therefore you can launch it that way. Now, there is also a number of brand new features available as well. The most handy is undeniably the new network status screen. So you can bring this up from the sidebar menu, troubleshooting, you can toggle this menu, and it gives you a lot of telemetry to show you exactly what your experience is currently like with your downstream, upstream, things like that. You can toggle this menu for PS5 streaming or also a remote play session as well. Some of the other new features you can take advantage of is the passcode option. So it's very similar to the one on console, where you can set a 4-digit passcode. We'll do a basic one here, 000. If you enter the wrong passcode 10 times in a row, locked out for 10 minutes, pretty standard. And now we can lock the device. Now before getting in, we're prompted to put in that passcode before we can get back into our portal. We also have some new accessibility options under the cloud streaming category, which this is going to be quite limited. So text size, for example, we can change to small, large, very large. This is only going to show up on very specific screens. So as it says, in-game purchase screens or the create menu for taking screenshots and recording video. And then we do have the option for the screen reader as well. It's going to show up in the same places, but if you do need this, you have the granular setting of speech speed and voice volume as well. Something else available now is baked-in game invitations via PS5 streaming. Now, this is a little bit restrictive in that you have to be streaming the game off Sony servers, and you have to be streaming that game that people are inviting you to. You can't be streaming a different game and then them invite you to it. It has to be something where you're actively playing, for example, Ghost of Tsushima, and then you get an invite for Legends to join up in a party. You can do that via streaming, but that is the only situation where the game invite will actually show up for you. Another new feature is 3D audio, which should be available on PS5 game streaming and also remote play as well. So as long as the game itself has 3D audio, then it should finally work now through the portal. For remote play, you want to make sure that setting is enabled on the console itself, because you're still sending that screen to the portal. From streaming on Sony servers, then it's something where I believe it's enabled automatically. There's no new settings within the portal itself to make sure that is turned on. The game itself has to be 3D audio compatible, and you can still utilize that from not only a PS Link device, which is your official wireless options, but also wired headsets as well. Now, I do want to also point out that they did make a very deliberate change to standard remote play controls, and that the PlayStation button no longer controls the PS5 console. it is always going to bring up the quick menu sidebar for the portal. So now the PS5 Control Center and the PS5 long press, which would take you home, these are on the sidebar. This has no long press or anything, so it's always for the quick menu. You can still do a swipe gesture to bring this menu up. But otherwise, if you want to bring up the Control Center, you're always going to be 2 taps away from it. Same for going home as well. So I imagine that's not really an ideal change. I'm sure people are not going to enjoy that, but for now, that's how it was changed. Also, while we're just in remote play, standard remote play, we can also quickly show off that there is still the troubleshoot option. It does remove the verify license option because you're just right now already launching and playing the game on your console, so it's already verified. But we can toggle the network status screen, and now we get that for the remote play session. Great way to troubleshoot some errors.